Western Sydney literacy movement, and it's my pleasure to invite you all here to this showcase reading today. First and foremost, I would just like to start by acknowledging the local Māori people who, if you're here, Malo Lele from everyone at Sweatshop. It's an honour to be here. And for the local Māori people here, we went to the local marae, but there was no one there. So, and I, being from Australia, I don't know the proper acknowledgements, but I do think it's really important that we do acknowledge the Māori people whose land that we're on today. So, Sweatshop is a Western Sydney literacy-based movement in Western Sydney that's dedicated to critical thinking and creative writing for Indigenous and culturally and linguistically diverse communities. It's my pleasure to welcome the readers today, my Sweatshop sisters Phoebe and Shirley, and I think we'll just jump into it. So can everybody give a round of applause for our first reader, Phoebe?
Yakai! Bugaji! Bugaji! Nai Uminyale! Nai Nichinyale! Yakai! Bugaji! Each rock must not be taken. If it is, it must be placed back in the same place it was. My grandmother walked here. So did her grandmother in the ones before. This is a lesson I was taught by my father when I was a child, when I innocently collected granite rocks from around our home to make a path to the river where we lived at Yulbunbu. Tall brown trees with the leaves the colour of green, greys, shades of burnt oranges and pinks around it. Yulbunbu is untamed with wild weeds, grass and anthills. There's dirt and pathways of hooves ingrained in the ground. The air at Yulbunbu reveals how remote it is. It smells of water of the river flowing slowly with small brown fishes, the ironbark and freshwater mangrove trees blowing their scent in the warm breeze, and the dust filling the air as it is being walked on. Yulbunbu continues to be as it always has been. Time has never held an important existence here. The earth at Yulbunbu tells you not to dig it. I know. I've dug it with my own hands. It is hard with thousands of rocks, each possessing its own and unique ancient shape. Some of the rocks look like the bark from the bloodwood tree. As you dig deeper, the rocks become sharp and pointed. They do not want to be pulled out of the earth. It is earth that grows life that can withstand limited water, and a sun that turns my dark brown skin the most beautiful black. Black that allows a night to be quiet, and allows a campfire to be part of the stars, and opens closed ears for stories to be heard. My father told me of stories of Midiki, the protector, how no matter where you are, he is always looking after you, always watching. My 9-year-old hands are cemented in the ground where I dug the earth at Yulbunbu. So are my brothers, sisters, mother and father, my entire family. I left Yulbunbu not long after I dug its deep orange earth with my hands, but I always felt it. Yulbunbu came with me everywhere. Like Midiki, I felt it watching, protecting, and waiting to call me back. Sometimes I would see Midiki sitting in a tree and then fly away. I returned to Yulbunbu a woman. I craved for the freedom and warmth feelings it had given me as a child. The path that I created with the granite rocks has gone, and the rocks have been placed back to their homes. But it is not the same, and there are many rocks that have been moved and taken. On the journey back to Yulbunbu, iron sheds cover views of Nadabulgan. White cement covers the earth, and white skin is seen. Yulbunbu now has fences sectioning each part of it. The gum trees and iron bark have been cleared away, and the ground is left bare. I feel the loss of their weight in the hard ground, and I cry Yulbunbu's tears. I search for my hands, but they are now part of the earth. Yulbunbu has swallowed it. Weeds and green patchy wild grass has replaced it. There is much that is foreign to Yulbunbu, introduced by foreign hands. The path to Yulbunbu is as I remember. The path passes Nadabulgan, and the tin, iron and glass bowl remains where my grandmother grew and lived. I stopped on the way to Yulbunbu, and I visited the place where my grandmother lived. I imagined her with her mother placing their hands into the earth as I did as a child. My mother showed me a rock. This rock was resting under a black bloodwood tree. My mother told me that on that rock, my grandma sat and had lunch with her. They ate hamper sandwiches with onion and tomato and sipped on bushels tea from enamel cups. This rock looks like it had fallen off the face of Nunavulcan. It is mud red, indented. It does not look comfortable for an old woman to sit on and eat, but I want to sit on that rock, and I want to eat too. I did not know my grandmother. She passed before I was born, but I know her through stories and memories of the ones who did. If I touch that rock, I feel my grandmother, and her 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 grandmother, and so on. I understand the lesson my father told me as a child. I do not need to make the path. The path is there. The path has always been there and always will be.
Hello, come in, my brothers and sisters. Can everybody give Phoebe a big round of applause? Yeah, sit. Thank you for coming. If you guys missed Bring It On, you guys missed something really amazing. I think that was the main attraction and the highlight for this festival. Lucky did such an amazing job of Watu. I'm just going to start reading. God and Tonga. Number 2. I am 14 and I am in Tonga. I haven't gone for a number 2 in 3 whole days because the toilet in Nana's house doesn't flush. Everyone has to go in an old laundry powder bucket filled with water. As if I would put my bum on a bucket like that. It makes me feel poor. We pass the Royal Cemetery. In Tongan, it is called Malaepula, meaning the red square. Red is our national colour. Nana tells me that this is King's Road, the last road our kings will take before they go to heaven. The pine trees that line the road, a gift from the Europeans, are dead because they have hit the salt water below. The trees make me think of an ocean of human carcasses. Nana is driving me to Anahulu caves. She says that the water beneath the caves will be good for my bum and I'll be able to go to the toilet again. You don't need to wear seatbelts in Tonga. We drive unstrapped past basketball courts filled with barefooted children and brick shoe boxes with barred windows where the Chinese sell chicken twisties and pineapple Fanta. I see the Westpac Bank, the submarine sandwich shop famous for its 1,000 island dressing, and the white pillars of Tonga High, a selective school for spoiled brats. Now we've hit jungle, and the ferns hanging out across the dirt road scratch against the windshield of my Nana's van like fingernails. Nana is singing the words to Analato. Si kau tangata mo kau whewhine, mo matuku atu o mohe, ka e tuku ke u ai whiape, he ko homo whaka o sipoe. In English, this means, O men and women, retire and rest for now, for I cannot go to sleep. This night will be our last. Nana would sing the lullaby to me whenever I was little and feeling sad. I watch Nana sway her shoulders from side to side while she drives, her afro moving back and forth like a black cloud. In front of the cave trail are 2 enormous brown men in polo blue uniforms approaching our vehicle. One of the officers has reddish brown skin and a caterpillar mustache. The other officer has biceps so big that his short sleeves are going to explode. They're both dressed like the police officers we have in Sydney. This is because the commissioner in Tonga is a white man who promised to save Tonga's police force. Only the badge that Tongan officers wear is different to Australia's. It has a gold crown with the Tongan flag on either side. Underneath the crown it says, Koe o tua, mo Tonga kohoku tofia, which means God and Tonga are my inheritance. Tulo, Big Bicep says to Nana, which means excuse me. Then he says, a boy tried to kill himself in the caves last night. We're trying to get him out. Nana slowly stretches her hand toward me and strokes the side of my head as she replies to the officer, I pray his sentence is not too long. A thin layer of sweat runs from her chubby fingers down my ear and cheek. The tiny hairs on Caterpillar Mustache's upper lip wriggle as if he might laugh. He's lucky if he gets 3 years. You should be put to death if you try and kill yourself. Big Biceps clears his throat and raises his hand in front of his nose. He begins to rub his thumb against the tips of his fingers. Nana gives each officer $50. Then she starts up the van and does a hard U-turn. There is no singing as she drives away. When we pass the Royal Cemetery again, I think of the boy who tried to kill himself. Only Tonga can decide when we die.
Funny ethnics. Tammy and I waited for the train at Yaguna Station, shivering in the cold under the sign that read, "This area is under constant 24/7 surveillance." A Vietnamese lady approached us, her black foam platform slapped against the tar, and you could see her gold tooth when she smiled. "Hai cưng đẹp quá, muốn làm massage không?" "You too, so pretty. Would you like to do massage?" She was a southerner and she sounded like my mum. She pointed in the direction of the Hume Highway towards the Golden Phoenix, an apartment on top of Al Rabir Butchery. Its grimy windows were covered in pink curtains, a cardboard sign, and fairy lights. If she had said "Dumbo," it would have literally meant your hands slapping and kneading flesh. But no, she had said "Massa." The word slithered like a slimy snake into dirtier territory, where hands offer happy endings. I felt my cheeks heating up and my upper lip get sweaty. I glared at the madam from the Golden Phoenix from head to toe. I wanted to go off at her because she was perpetuating the stereotype that all Vietnamese girls were Little Miss Saigons. But she was an oldie from NZYWF, just like my mum. She only knew 2 ways to survive. You either exploited others or you were exploited by others. It wasn't her fault. Tammy responded to the madam in English with a loud voice. "We don't speak slimy syphilis round here." We boarded the train and didn't talk for the whole way. I looked outside the window, but due to the surrounding darkness, I was confronted by my own reflection. Maybe we did look like baby prostitutes. Me with my hair down, in a blue off-the-shoulder top and wax-coated jeans that bit into the flesh of my hips. Tammy in a tight black dress and thigh-high boots. We got off at Marrickville Station and walked to the Factory Theatre. Inside there was a courtyard with rainbow fairy lights and a bar area where stylish hipsters were drinking low-carb beers. One girl had blue lipstick, a septum piercing, and the word struggle tattooed in delicate cursive along her collarbone. She was talking to a guy in a tartan shirt whose red beard sprouted like pubes from his chin. Funny Ethnics was on at 7, but we got in there at 7:15. The room was warm and damp with human breath. It smelled like Australia Day in there. beer, sausage rolls, and Lynx deodorant. Along the rows of red seats, people clutched sweating VBs and take-out food. Tahir's raspy voice was booming, and there were camera crews at either side of the stage. As we searched for our seats in row B, I noticed the cameramen shining their lights in our faces and several people in the crowd who had turned to look at me and Tammy. They were laughing at us. Suddenly, Tahir's gobbling voice wobbled across the theatre like a clown on a unicycle. That's the thing about ethnics. They love to be late. You tell them 7 and they read it as 7:30. Tahir pointed his microphone in our direction. He had on his trademark stunned expression where his eyeballs bulged out of his potato head. The rest of the crowd jeered and I scrambled to row B. I started sweating again, just like when the Madam of the Golden Phoenix asked if I wanted to give handjobs for a living. Girls, just relax, okay? I know you're Asian, but this is not border security. Tahir continued as the audience of ethnics and Aussies laughed. He let the laughter die down before he moved on. He introduced the comics like a ringmaster at a circus. The first was a Greek woman whose day job was an IT consultant. One day, she went to a salon and asked for a Brazilian. The staff was so overwhelmed at how hairy she was that they needed several people to pull the wax off her labia. The second was a Fijian Indian guy who had a day job at a video game arcade, handing out coins to patrons. That's why they called him the token black guy. The third was a Chinese guy who complained to the audience about the lack of diversity in government road safety ads. Where were all the Asian women? The last comic was Vietnamese. He had a crush on a hot girl, but didn't have a chance with her because she accused him of eating her dog. After the dog-eating guy finished his set, Tammy leaned over. The frangipani scent of her perfume closed in on me, and I could almost taste the wilted petals mixed in with her sweat. "He's really cute," she whispered. I observed Dog Eater's face as he left the stage. He had a strong brow line and a sharp nose. I tried looking for his name on the program, but as soon as I flipped to the other side, steaming brown lumps of meat pie dropped all over my paper. I looked up and saw the guy beside me clutching a 4 and 20 in his ham fist. I was going to spew. His piggy eyes focused on the stage, totally oblivious to the sauce and mince running down his hairy arm. This dickhead used his mouth for 2 things: shove pies inside and laugh at ethnics. I looked over to Tammy, but she too was fixated on the show. I rolled up my program with the meat inside and placed it on the floor under my seat. Then I stood up and I walked out. This time I didn't care about Tahir making fun of me. I let his voice gargle away like water being flushed down the toilet. When the gig was over, Tammy ordered a martini at the bar. She didn't ask why I walked out half an hour early. She sculled the martini and sprinted to the other side of the courtyard, towards a crowd of people who were already gathering at the bottom of the stairs that led to the backstage exit of the theatre. She wanted to get Tahir's autograph. The doors to the backstage of the theatre opened and the comics descended the stairs. The Greek woman, the Fijian Indian guy, the Chinese guy, and Dog Eater. Some people politely clapped as they slunk away in different directions. Finally, Tahir came out, his Reeboks lightly springing from each step. He was wearing a yellow and black tracksuit, just like the Fat Pizza uniform. I watched Tammy go nuts. She jogged on the spot, held her head in her hands, and screamed at full capacity like a war cry. Tahir put up both of his hands and surrendered to the adoration by bowing his head. I withdrew further into a corner of the courtyard and sat at an empty table, distancing myself from the crazed worship. "Hey, anyone sitting here?" I felt a finger lightly tap on the bare skin of my shoulder. It was Dog Eater. His features looked sharper when face to face, like an exclamation mark. His strong brow line and straight nose ending with pillowy lips. I shook my head and could feel my cheeks heating up. I was too surprised to answer in words because no male had ever approached me before, They usually went for Tammy. According to her, I didn't make enough welcoming signals, like eye contact and smiling. Dog Eater pulled up a stool and started to smoke. I leaned back. He was cute, but I did not want to inhale the fumes streaming from his lips. The crowd had shifted into a murmur as Tahir signed each person's merchandise. I saw you in the crowd, Dog Eater said. Tahir roasted you and your mate for coming in late. He turned his head to blow smoke. Listen, he continued, I'm staying at Petersham Town Hall. Why don't we continue this conversation back there? It's only a short walk from here. The ends of his thick eyebrows sloped downwards, framing his dark eyes. I didn't think it hurt to get to know him, since I'd never met a Vietnamese person who made a living from laughs. Plus, he wasn't that much taller than me, so I figured if anything bad happened, I'd fight him. We walked to the apartment where he was staying, a 3-bedroom share situation with a dirty little kitchen. There was a plate of cold baked beans still on the table, and 5 pairs of faded undies were drying on a string lining the balcony. Dog Eater stood near the undies and motioned me over. This is heaps better than the shitty backpacker hostels they usually cram us into. He lit up another cigarette and leaned both elbows back against the brick railing of the balcony. I stood awkwardly beside him and clutched my handbag with sweaty palms. I tried to think of something to say, but had nothing besides the fact that I regretted my decision to come back alone with him. I didn't know what would come next, and whatever it was, I was probably unprepared for it. What would Tammy do? She'd been going back to strangers' apartments since she was 15. At 21, this was my first time. There's a better view there, up on the top level. Dog Eater stubbed out his cigarette on the ledge of the balcony and pointed upwards with a tobacco-stained finger. I turned to look and could feel him lean in closer so that the arm he was pointing with was centimetres from my left shoulder. The breath of his words brushed against my ear and the heat from his torso warmed my back. Let's go then. The words tumbled out of my mouth before I could catch each one and shove it back in. I was more prepared to climb the roof of an apartment than to stand beside this guy, not knowing what to say or do. Dog Eater walked towards the other side of the balcony and up some steps. There was a small iron ladder that led to the corrugated iron roof. He stopped near the ladder and looked at me like a lost dog. I passed him and started climbing. The cast iron was ice cold under my palms, and I kept looking down to make sure my boots were meeting each rung. Dog Eater was 2 rungs behind me, his thick black hair pushed back by the wind. I realised that he was able to see my ass from below, and I cringed. My mum had always told me that I had a pancake ass, wide in surface area, but flat. I told her that was an incredibly offensive thing to say to me, but she waved a hand in my face. Rain started to sprinkle, which made the folds of corrugated iron slippery. Most of my body weight was shifted onto my left ankle, and my left hand clung to the piping that joined both sides of the roof. By the time we reached the part where the roof was joined to the top level, droplets of rain had settled into my hair and made it flat against my scalp. Great! Flat hair to go with a flat ass. Dog Eater would see me clearly now for what I was, a little girl with makeup running off her face. He was too puffed to talk and merely waved a thin hand towards the view before us. It was a shabby postcard of the suburbs. The centre point tower was a pinpoint in the distance that flickered against the rain like a dying signal. I'll probably move here someday, Dog Eater said. Sydney is where all the opportunities are, even if it is just selling out and telling self-hating jokes. He smiled gently. Maybe he was older than I'd originally thought. Dong, dong, dong. The sound made us both jump. It was the Petersham Town Hall clock, its round white face jutting into the sky like a rival moon. Both hands pointed to 12. Listen, it was super great hanging out with you, but I need to get home. Without giving him a chance to reply, I legged it over the brick balcony and clambered onto the roof again. I sprinted back into the apartment. My boots thundered down the stairs 2 at a time until I was back on the street. While I walked to the station, I stared at my phone. 15 missed calls from Tammy and 30 from my mum.
Alright, can we give everybody another round of applause? Alright, Mello. Yeah, so we have half an hour, I think 15 minutes for Q&A, and then 15 other minutes to just hang around, talk to us. There's very limited copies of The Big Black Thing Chapter 3. I got very generous halfway through my trip, and now there's only more. Each are $20, so if you want to come in, if you want to be that special somebody out of the four who will get it, then it's there. Yeah, Q&A. Let's go. Hey, what's up? Is this on? No. Yes? Okay. Maybe my voice is just really loud. Yeah.
I've got a question. Hi, thank you for your reading. That's really great to hear. But do you, the three of you, feel any kind of responsibility for representation? It's like such a tricky area. But do you feel that put on you? Do you feel it yourselves?
Hi Katrina, thanks for coming. Look, I think that's a responsibility that is inevitable when you exist as an artist of colour in a landscape that has not prioritised cultural diversity. So that is a responsibility that is placed onto you whether you like it or not. So growing up, I didn't see many representations of Vietnamese Australians on TV, and whenever I did, it was mainly, boat people, people who cook nice food, and so basically the scope of my understanding of what a Vietnamese Australian person contributes to society was incredibly limited. So I think as an artist of colour, that's a responsibility that we need to take on, and I think I embrace that responsibility very much. So what I would do as an artist of colour is I would engage first with the Vietnamese Australian community and see, what representation do I want to bring to the broader landscape, and what truth do I want to speak about living as a Vietnamese Australian woman, second generation, in Western Sydney. So that's a responsibility that I wholeheartedly embrace. But also I think it's really important to understand for me that I'm a Vietnamese Australian voice that is part of a wider Vietnamese Australian community. I don't speak for that community, but I speak as part of that community. And so with that sentiment in mind, I really hope that other Vietnamese Australian members of the community who want to pursue the arts have the courage to do so.
Yeah, I think personally for me, in terms of the burden of representation, is that there's literally that Pacifica communities in Australia are largely ignored, vilified and stereotyped. So the perfect example of that is Chris Lilly, who did Summer Heights High and Journey from Tonga. I know Māori TV banned it, which is great, but Chris Lilly is Australia's god, I think. And Chris Lilly presents Tongan men as hypersexual, as violent, and as criminal. And that's the stereotype that my father, my brothers, and to an extent myself has had to grow up in. And especially considering that there is no Tongan Australian literature that is recognised and mainstream, means that there is a huge problem of white supremacy in Australia, which is ongoing. So for me, I don't speak for the Tongan community. Like Shirley said, I speak from the Tongan community, and that's from my own intersections as a mixed race Tongan Australian woman from Mount Druitt, and also acknowledging that I do have privileges of being lighter skinned. And that's not something to be ashamed of, that's just my experience and my own contribution to the Tongan Australian community. And so yeah, it is a burden to have people think that I speak for all of the Tongan Australian community or all of the Pacific Australian community. And so it was just amazing to come to Dunedin and see like his play reading. I'd actually never seen a Pacifica play reading before that wasn't my own. So it was, Ofuato was really heartwarming. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Can you guys hear me from here?
Yeah.
I think for me, when I write, it's all about creating pathways for other Indigenous women. I don't know any other Aboriginal people from my mob, no Kukujangan writers, and that is obviously very problematic. And it's not for me, it's for the people after me, it's for my little sister, it's for my children to come and their children, and I feel very empowered by this, and I just want to uplift my community, and it's very special and important, this kind of work.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Just a comment, I just want to say Mawa Pito, thank you guys for speaking your truths and sharing your writing with us. It's awesome to have guests here from Australia, Indigenous Australian as well. I did have a little question. I just wanted to ask, how have your own Indigenous communities reacted to your work or responded to it? Has there been a general have they received it quite well? Has there been any controversy or anything like that?
So the first piece that my parents ever read, my mum's full Tongan and she was born in Auckland, and my dad's mixed race as well. But he's very, islander, big man, very gentle. But they read my first piece, which is called Pacific to Pacifica. It's like an essay about being what it means to be Pacifica Australian, or being Pacifica in Australia. And I wrote about how this Balangi girl named Jess would tease me because I had black mahana hair. And she used to make me go home and I'd cry, and she said I was poor and stuff because, my hair was figgy. And my mum read that, and then she came up to me, I was in the kitchen, I was eating, and then she's like, why'd you say we were poor? And I come from a family of 7 siblings. I'm the oldest, and both my parents are security guards, which I think is a stereotypical job for Pacifica parents to have, and that's because white supremacy doesn't allow ease of access to higher education and stuff. So my mom's like, why'd you write we were poor? And I just looked at her and I was like, what do you mean? I had to have tin spaghetti sandwiches for lunch sometimes because there was just no dinner at home. And then she's like, people don't need to know that we're poor. And then I had to explain to her that I was like, oh, Mum, I'm very thankful for all the hard work that you do, but you have to admit that having 8 kids is harder than Balangi people who just have 1 or 2 kids, right? She's like, oh yeah. Then my dad goes, don't you get it? It's a metaphor. So that's kind of the reaction that I got from my parents, and I think that kind of speaks for the broader Tongan Australian community. There's a lot of pride. I'm the first person in my family to go to uni, and the first person in my family to graduate from uni. So there's a lot of pride in what I do. So there's a lot of pride in what I do, but there's also a lot of, not shame, but also a lot of secrecy around the difficulties that we have as Pacificas in countries that uphold white supremacist structures. So it's just about going through that kind of awkward stage with a lot of my family members to try and get them to understand that it's okay. Your struggles don't have to be a secret, and our struggles need to be heard so that we can end white supremacy. Yeah.
I think with my writing, you know, everything that I write, I have a very close discussion with my parents and like my grandparents, just because, you know, there's certain things that I don't know that I shouldn't be, in the sense of cultural stories, that I shouldn't be sharing in public. And that's really, I'm very kind of wary about doing those type of things, because living away from your parents, not being where you brought up on your own country, you know, that type of that distance, I feel sometimes, and because I went to uni, was very you know, a very white uni, and I went away when I was quite young, so I think that type of connection is very important for me in my writing. And yeah, I don't want to re-traumatize anything too, especially when I'm talking about, you know, my grandparents and like the people who passed away. That's something that is, yeah, but it's a close discussion with my parents, really.
Honestly, I think my community judges me a lot for what I do. Many of the, I think, press interviews that I've given for, I guess, Vietnamese Australian media outlets, I always get the same sort of questions, and the questions are always like, do your parents approve of what you do? How do you make a living? And so they're quite pragmatic questions, but I think being, you know, Vietnamese Australian and Asian Australian more broadly, I think Asian Australians have been fit into the category of being a model minority in Australia, where we're seen to be go-getters, and we are very aspirational in terms of wealth. And so I think that toxic stereotype does seep into the community and the way that my community looks at itself. And so when they come across someone like me who brands herself as a writer, they're kind of like surprised by that, and they kind of wonder why my parents haven't written me off or haven't been like totally disappointed in me. But look, I think I keep pushing forward because I know that there are other fellow Vietnamese Australians in the second generation who want to speak up against, you know, that very narrow stereotype of being that model minority that just gets a job at the bank and then owns a couple of properties before they hit 30. Anyway, yeah, so look, I can sense that unhappiness in my community, and so I want to speak up about it. And at this point in time, that judgment from the first generation or the oldies, it doesn't really faze me anymore. And thankfully, my parents have grown to be supportive of what I do.
With Sweatshop, you're in Western Sydney, and Shirley talked this morning a bit about that community being really important. That's a really important part of it. I just wondered if you find that your community attracts more people of colour from around Australia, or if you do anything else around Australia, or if you're kind of, I mean, you're obviously in New Zealand. That's so great. I'm so glad. Yeah, does that question sound like a question?
I get, like, are you trying to explain what Western Sydney is, and then
Or you saying that does Sweatshop work outside of
Yeah.
Sydney?
And also if people come to you because you're clearly great.
Yeah, so for background context, I know there's probably like similar suburbs in and around Aotearoa, like probably more than North Island, but Western Sydney is the most culturally and linguistically diverse collection of communities in Sydney. So there's hundreds of community groups and thousands of different languages and dialects that are spoken other than English. But because Western Sydney is seen as a socio-economically disadvantaged area, we get a lot of stereotypes ourselves from living in Western Sydney. Usually the stereotype is that just Western Sydney is full of ethnics who are dumb, stupid, and criminals. And so because of that stereotype, in recent years, like the economy is slowly building in Western Sydney. But when I was growing up, I grew up in Milan, which is a housing commission suburb in the suburb of Liverpool. And I grew up with a lot of crime around my area, and a lot of other Pacificans who were really struggling. So yeah, and in terms of Sweatshop, what Sweatshop tries to do is uplift not only the voices of Indigenous and culturally and linguistically diverse peoples, but those peoples who exist in that socio-economic stereotype because of the areas that we're from. I don't know if anybody's heard, there's this SBS show called Struggle Street, and it was based, yeah, it was based in Nantucket, where I'm from. On that show, there was a lady who was pregnant and doing ice, and that's kind of Australia's collective thinking about Western Sydney. And so Sweatshop uses our platform to help uplift those voices out of that, uplift those culturally and linguistically diverse voices from Western Sydney above those stereotypes, and even through those stereotypes, because I think clever writers can use irony and those stereotypes to create really amazing literature. And in terms of the work Sweatshop does, yes, we do go outside of Western Sydney. So we do stuff in Sydney, festivals, panels, readings. We go to Melbourne, kind of the same thing. I think in the last 5 years, they've done workshops in Darwin and stuff. So yeah, there is a lot of work that we try to do to create that intercultural dialogue between other culturally and linguistically diverse communities in different areas. But then also a lot of just randoms come to us. So like we have a Vietnamese Australian writer named Tien, who originally grew up in Perth, but because he lives in Western Sydney now, he comes to Sweatshop, but he kind of brings that kind of Perth flavour, which is nothing, no, I'm joking. Yeah.
I'd just like to add that I think that the politics that Sweatshop operates on is a growing movement outside of Sweatshop as well. I think that's really exciting, and I've noticed that, especially when I went to visited Melbourne earlier this year, there was a group of writers there called the Footscray West Writers Group in Footscray, and I think they reflect a lot of Sweatshop's kind of politics, and I think that's interesting to me, and I think that in the future I would hope to see that there are culturally and linguistically diverse communities across the world who kind of come together and create those safe spaces and make art. It doesn't have to just be one organisation doing that. So yeah, I after what I saw in Melbourne, I'm optimistic that that's a growing movement among many artists of colour across the world.
We have time for one more question, and then I'm going to gap it. True. Anyone?
Otherwise, we're just going to check out the sales and countdown or something.
Yeah.
What have you thought of New Zealand so far?
Oh, you had a question? Did you have a question? No, go for it. Yeah.
I was just wondering, as artists, you always got to influence people, right? And I'm just wondering,
what influence would you want, when you finish, or what influence would you want to have on your own respective communities, and would you want to influence more than just them? Like, are you trying to, is it just targeted for them, or is it for everyone?
That's such a good question. Yeah, well, for me, no, I want to influence different communities in different ways, right? So I spoke earlier about how I write so that, like, the Tongan Australian community, but more broadly the Pacifica Australian community, don't need to feel like they need to hold secrets. I think secrets really are painful for our community and painful for our families in the community, because white supremacy has made them feel so ashamed about the experiences that they've had to, and the conditions that they've had to live in, and that I've had to live in personally. So I write so that I can kind of help heal that pain, and I think that the work of healing is really important, and I think the work of healing can, in Pacific Australian communities, just speaking on my own, like, I think only other Pacific Australians can do that, and then only other Pacificans can help heal each other. There's a really, really big problem that I think has been going on for ages, where kind of one cultural community is trying to speak for every cultural community, and every time they get it wrong, and every time it causes more damage than good. In the sense of Chris Wheely trying to speak about Tongans, created so much damage on the Tongan Australian community and the broader Pacifica community. So that's one avenue as to why I write, and how I want to influence my community so that they're healing. But I also want to help influence other people of colour. I want them to know that Pacifica communities exist. We're very creative, we're very cultural, we're very together, and we're here and we exist. And there's a lot of Pacifica communities in Western Sydney and in Australia more broadly, and so who aren't represented at all, or are represented really poorly in mainstream Australian media. So it's to help bring other cultural communities together as well. But then I also want to influence the dismantling of white supremacy, which I think a lot of people hold white supremacy in their brains, regardless of whether or not their skin is white or if they're white. But I do want white people to understand where my experiences, where I come from, and to help them reflect on the damages that white supremacy has caused, and then to hopefully they figure out how to help become an ally and dismantle those really oppressive structures with us through storytelling, through that Talanoa, which is so strong in Pacific communities.
Yeah. I think the people who I write for is always going to be Kuka-Jungan, like Jungan people where I'm from. But it's also for everyone else as well. I think I write to motivate and for my people to be proactive. When the history of your people where you're not allowed to speak your own language or to tell your stories, that's to sit down and write them out. For me to do that is just so powerful, And them old people, they are just like so happy, and I can feel that, And when I write, I just feel like they're coming in and they're writing what they weren't able to say. And I hope for my writing, I hope it ignites that type of fire, that wunchu. I hope that ignites that in everybody who doesn't have a voice, who was not able to tell their story.
For me, I hope that my community reads my work, and they also listen to other emerging voices from our communities, and to reflect on an alternative on how to view cultural identity in Australia and what it means to be Australian. So, yep, that's my answer to that. In terms of what I think of New Zealand so far, it's so cold here. I wasn't prepared for that. So, Yeah, look, but in terms of my experiences, I feel like maybe I'm not getting a whole snapshot of Dunedin just by looking at the art scene here. And to me that's not totally surprising, seeing as I come from a place that similarly artists of colour are not exactly visible. So yeah, that's my honest impression. However, I will say that I think the people of Dunedin and the audience members who I've interacted with today appear to be very open-minded, and that's a wonderful thing to me. For me to feel somewhat safe in this space to talk honestly about my thoughts and feelings. So I really thank Dunedin for that, and I'm really thankful to be here as well.
Did anybody local to Dunedin know that there was a local marae? Yeah, cool. All right, awesome. Because I think a few people were like, what's that? So yeah, that's been my impression of Dunedin. I'm joking. Thank you all so much for coming. Dunedin is also nicknamed Dunners, and it's just funny because my last name's Dunn. So maybe this is my town now. Yeah, thanks so much for your questions. I think we're going to end it. If you want to come up, talk to us, more than welcome. There's 4 books. They're all ready to go. All right, thanks so much, guys.